Okay, we're here for another Mill Session interview, and I'm delighted to say that with me today is Dave Buckley. Hello, Dave.
Good evening.
Now, I really enjoyed your Mill Sessions. You did Me and the River, Bob, a couple of other songs as well, acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And I've also had the pleasure of watching you and listening to you perform in the Radio Warrington studios. You did a song called Catch the Moon, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Now, what really surprised me was, one day I was flicking through social media and a picture came up of Rick Astley behind a set of drums.
Oh, yeah.
And then a comment underneath it from you saying, Rick's on my set of drums there, and I still use those lights.
That's right, yeah.
You were a drummer, first and foremost.
I was, yeah.
And still are.
Yeah, yeah.
So, to see you performing those acoustic songs on the guitar there, you know, have you always played the guitar?
Pretty much.
As well as drum?
Yeah, I've always played it just as badly as I do now, yeah. The reason I ended up on drums was when I was at school, a bunch of us used to hang out together. We were all into music, and I vividly remember we were at Appleton, sat under a tree, as you do when you're 16 or 17, and one of the guys, Keith, said, let's form a band, I've got a guitar. And another bloke called Phil said, oh, well, I like Paul McCartney, so I'll get a bass. And they both looked at me and said, you better get some drums then. So it wasn't my chosen instrument, it was chosen for me.
So was you already playing guitar then, or was your drums your first instrument?
Drums were the first instrument, but I did have an acoustic knocking around, which I didn't really know what to do with.
Okay, so your first band then, was that King's Harvest?
That's right, yeah.
So that was the lads from school?
That's right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of music were you playing back then?
Very, very bad music. All of us were learning how to play. All the equipment was dreadful. Mics were breaking down. We didn't have a decent PA. I could just about afford a pair of drumsticks. I had a terrible drum kit. But it was a typical school band where you don't know what you're supposed to know. So it was very tentative. But bit by bit, we started gigging. I mean, we were very young. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we enjoyed it. It was good fun.
How long did that band last then?
I think it lasted quite a few years actually, but I left after about a year. I didn't really like what they were doing because they wanted to play clubs and do cabaret stuff, and I was into a lot more kind of intense and different kinds of music than they were into. They liked pop music, but I was into something a bit more underground, man.
Psychedelic kind of stuff.
Yes.
Hence the shirt.
Yeah, festival shirt. What happened was we used to play at not a million miles from where this interview's taking place actually, in a church hall at Stretton. That's where we used to practice and do sort of club gigs there and things for the few local kids. And then this particular evening we were playing and a bunch of hippies were stood looking and staring at me very intensely, and they all looked very cool and they all had long hair and interesting trousers and so on, and it was a bunch of guys out of a band called Free Flight, and they needed a drummer, so they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I said goodbye to King Harvest and joined Free Flight.
Right, doing psychedelic kind of music?
It was sort of, if you can imagine Iron Butterfly crossed with early Pink Floyd.
Right.
So yes, in other words. They had a proper light show with a guy called Stoney, with proper swirly stuff going on behind the band. We had roadies. We didn't gig a great deal, but when we did, it was a real happening. It was quite spectacular. But again, we were still about 17 or 18.
Still fairly young then.
Yeah, and we did all original stuff. We didn't do any covers at all.
And was you writing and contributing then? Even though drummers, you don't associate many drummers with songwriters.
Well, I always seem to have ideas for songs and arrangements, and an awful lot of them were not very good. And I also liked mandolins, weirdly. So before I had a guitar, I think I actually had a mandolin, which I couldn't play. But I found the chords out and wrote stuff on the mandolin, much to the surprise of the guys in Free Flight who, what? You wrote it on, what are the chords? I don't know.
Right.
That was a good band, and I got some musical friendships out of that I retain to this day.
These are all Warrington bands as well, because you're from Warrington, aren't you?
Yeah. In fact, Free Flight reformed when I was 60 for a one-off gig. with all the original members apart from Rob Dandy, who was a lovely guy, who was the lead guitarist who passed away about 20 odd years ago. He was a lovely guy. And the keyboard player, Rick, he doesn't play anymore. And astonishingly enough, I'd gotten to know Brian Gulland, who was in a prog, sort of medieval prog band called Griffin, through something else I've been doing. And Brian came and played keyboards for us. And he's an astonishing character. He had the same keyboard teacher as Rick Wakeman at the Royal School College of Music. Wow. Yeah, and there he is playing with my old school band.
Now, there's a couple more bands that I want to just briefly talk about: Moonshine and Midnight.
Yeah, Moonshine was my first sort of pro band. I was in one briefly before that, which split up. And then Moonshine, who I'd known about, who originally called the Fox, are a really well-known local band. In fact, the first local band I ever saw when I was about 15, 16. And they needed a drummer. They were down to a trio by that point when I joined. And we were a very busy gigging band. We gigged all over the place. Everywhere you can think of, 6-7 nights a week. And I think it was really Moonshine that got me interested in recording, because the guitarist Paul, in their house, I think it was Orford Way, he'd converted the smallest room in the upstairs into a recording studio, and the drum booth was in the old coal cellar. There wasn't much room, but we recorded an EP in there. I had 2 songs on one side and Paul had 2 songs on the other side, and Mike, who is just in the darkness over there, he was the bass player. Yeah, it was a really good little band. That lasted a couple of years, and then that split up.
And there was Midnight.
Midnight.
We're getting into the mid-70s now, are we?
Yeah, about 75, 76. I just needed a pro band because that's what I was doing for a living. And I joined a band from Manchester called Midnight, who were led by a diva whose name I will never repeat. But we went round gigging around Germany, and we worked a lot, but I didn't like it. It wasn't what I wanted to do, because I was aware of all the new wave stuff that was happening, and that intrigued me, and it sounded like what I wanted to do, and I just didn't want to do all this disco stuff and wear huge trousers. So I left that, and it was immediately after I left that when I went to see my girlfriend who lived in Canterbury. I was on the way back and I auditioned for a band called the Count Bishops in London on the way back. Didn't get the gig, and it was on the way back on the National Express bus that I bumped into a guy called Jeff Hill.
Oh, the Jeff Hill band now. That's
right. Yeah. It's seamless, this, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's seamless.
Yeah.
Jeff had got a deal with a company called Chiswick, and he was actually on his way back from a recording session when I bumped into him on the bus.
So he'd already got the record deal?
He'd got a deal with Chiswick, well, the worst deal you can possibly imagine, but it was a deal, and he got a single due out. And he'd just come back from the session for the single. We got talking, and he didn't have a band. So I knew a mate of mine who I'd been talking with about putting something together after Moonshine broke up, and the lot I went to Germany with Midnight, called Ray Humphreys. And Jeff said, well, we need a bass player. I thought, well, I've got a mate who could probably play bass, and Ray could play bass. And that was how we got together.
So, a trio. You, Jeff and Ray.
Yeah.
We're in his studios
we
together.
We are indeed,
yes.
Studios.
Yeah. Great band, and you weren't together that long, really.
About 3 years.
3 years, but you were. I know you had some concerts with John Cooper Clarke supporting.
Yeah, we did a tour with John Cooper Clarke.
But there's a real interest in Jeff Hill Band's records today, isn't there?
I know, it's very odd. There's more interest now than when we were originally together.
Yeah, is there a live album on the horizon back then?
There is now. We did a lot of recording. Through Chiswick, we ended up having a session at Pathway, which is in Islington, which was a very small studio but had great sound. So you got Ian Dury been in there. Elvis Costello's first album was recorded there, and subsequent stuff as well. And Nick Lowe was a regular. Loads of people went through and did albums and things there. And we had a session there and recorded 4 songs. and we were due to have these. I don't think it was an EP that was planned by Chiswick, but the idea was we got another record out, and then we did a tour. We were supposed to do a tour with Motorhead, really, and we were supposed to go and lift off with Aisha, and then it all fell through. Don't really know why, but it did. So we were kind of, oh, all right, okay. So we then went through several of the record companies, local ones, trying to get stuff out, and that led eventually to us having the single out, which arrived in about 1979, which is the one that everybody seems to know about, which is Something's Wrong With My Baby, which is one of Jeff's great songs. Jeff was a really good writer.
Yeah, he's no longer with us, is he, Jeff?
No, I'm sorry to say, he passed away 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And he wrote a lot, and he had very high standards for writing. Everything he wrote was very good, as opposed to me, who wrote about 20 times as much as Jeff did, but only about 1 in 100 of my songs were any good whatsoever.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but certainly with some of the songs on the Mill sessions. But so the Jeff Hill band, a good live gigging band.
Yeah, we did a lot of gigs, a hell of a lot of gigs.
Yeah.
A very, very tight little band. Unlike a lot of the other new wave acts, we were actually sort of fairly well practiced musicians. So Ray and I gelled instantly as a rhythm section, and it improved my drumming enormously, because it was a 3-piece and because the songs were very short and structured, and they were all original. I really had to get my act together to get my drum style together, and it did me a world of good.
Okay, so after the Jeff Hill band, you were briefly in the Pink Pumps.
Yes, what happened was I was actually quite ill after the Jeff Hill band. I joined another band afterwards, which Jeff was perhaps going to join, but then decided to go solo, called Juliet and the Romeos, which was a sort of a sophisticated version of Blondie, but it didn't last long, for reasons I won't go into. Nothing to do with me, Gov. And unfortunately, a mixture of stress and other things, and I ended up quite ill in hospital for about 6 weeks. When I emerged, I thought I can't do this anymore, because the business was making me actually ill. So I got a proper job. A proper job. And after I got the proper job, I was playing drums in a sort of soul band called Snatch and the Poontangs, which is a nice brass section. But then I still felt I'd got unfinished business with the little 3-piece thing. So I ended up being asked to join a couple of guys who were getting something similar together, and that was the original Pink Pumps in about 1980,
Okay.
81 I think that was.
But didn't you get a little bit frustrated there because you wasn't getting the opportunity to use your own songs, or was that a different band?
No, it was. The difficulty is if you're just a bog standard local gigging band, people don't want to hear your own stuff. They want to hear stuff they know. And if you want to gig regularly, you can forget playing your own stuff. What I've always done is 2 or 3 original songs stuck in maybe each set, well spaced out, and make them sort of the kind of songs that people will think, oh, that's a sweet B-side, or whatever it is. But people don't want to hear it, which is a shame.
Okay.
And the bands who play gigs where you can do original stuff don't get any money, they don't gig a great deal, they rehearse a lot and get very frustrated.
It's a shame, isn't it? But the Mill sessions just give you an opportunity to perform these songs.
Yeah.
I want to mention the bands Drive Northwest and Indian Summer briefly as well. Indian Summer, you still...
Yeah, that's a good fun covers band. Drive Northwest was around for the best part of 20 years, and we did 3 albums of original stuff, which we self-released. Most of it I wrote, and we sold a lot. We were very, very good. We had some spectacularly good musicians in there, and some of them I still play with, and some of them have contributed to the solo stuff I've been doing over the last few years. So
Indian Summer, they're still going.
Yeah.
Pink Pumps, you're still touring with, and I believe I spoke to you over the weekend. You'd had 3 gigs in 3 different days. So
yeah,
busy man. Some super songs as well in your sets of your own. Some super songs on the Mill session. Some strange ones. Fire Stories. I can't quite work out what's going on in that one.
Well, Fire Stories is an odd one. It's the only song I've ever written after I dreamt it. I remember about late 90s, I woke up about 5:30 in the morning with a song in my head.
Right.
Went downstairs, this is before I had kids, when you could do this kind of thing. Wrote down what I could remember. There was a chord I just couldn't get my head round. I didn't know what it was a crucial missing chord. Went back to bed, dreamt about it again, came down, got the chord.
Well, fantastic. And people can listen to that song, Fire Stories. There's another one on there called Jesus Wants Me for the Bicycle.
Yeah.
Please check out the Mill Sessions with Dave Buckley. Dave, if people want to find out more about upcoming gigs, have you got a Facebook page?
Yeah, the Pink Pumps band is what to look for. I think Indian Summer have got one as well. I don't run Indian Summer, I just play drums. I play guitar in the Pink Pumps and sing. So yeah,
Super.
all of those things.
Well, listen, thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Likewise.
And, please
Thanks, Andy.
check out these Mill Sessions.
Thanks for the tea, Mike.
Cheers, Dave.
Cheers.